Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA. I'm Jessica Marshall here with another special summer episode of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. It was a rough weather week upstate. 5 confirmed tornadoes touched down in the capital region and in central New York. Closest to us here at the Times Union, a tornado in Saratoga County near the Great Sacandaga Lake. That brought winds that topped 110 miles per hour. The one, though, that did the most serious damage hit Rome, a small city near Utica. That one was 135 miles per hour, EF2 on the rating scale. It caused some serious damage to dozens of buildings downtown and killed one person. Governor Kathy Hochul surveyed the damage in Rome this week, calling it the worst thing the city had ever seen. She deployed National Guard troops to help with the cleanup. The governor also sat down for an exclusive interview this week with Times Union Capitol correspondent Dan Clark down at the Hearst Tower in Manhattan. The pair discussed the 2024 presidential election, climate change, congestion pricing, and a range of other newsworthy topics. We're going to play you an excerpt now of that conversation right here on The Eagle.
Governor, thank you for being here.
Well,
welcome to
glad we
Hearst
coordinated
Tower.
our outfits so well.
Is this your first time at the tower?
It is my first time, and I had the great pleasure of walking through the Good Housekeeping kitchens and brought back fond memories as a child when I would grab the magazine before my mother did and read all the articles and see it on digital platforms now. So no, it's just fun to be here. This is great. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, of course. I've never been here either. It's the most beautiful building I've ever been in. I don't know about anybody else. Amazing. I actually want to get to your governorship in a second, but I want to start on politics with you because we saw some news last night come out that reported that Minority Leader Jeffries and Majority Leader Schumer had privately told the president that, if he keeps running, they're going to damage their numbers in the House and the Senate. So we're getting to this point where, more things come out. You've been a big surrogate for him. So I'm assuming you saw that news. What did you think about that?
No, and interesting how you define a private conversation.
Yeah.
Just an observation. I hope my private conversations are more private than those. But listen, these are fascinating, unprecedented times in American history. I have spent an enormous amount of time with President Biden, have celebrated incredible milestones for our state, whether it's the Gateway Tunnel, the largest federal infrastructure project in American history. He was there at the advent of that, all the way up to Syracuse, when we can talk about what Micron is going to do to literally transform the entire upstate economy in a very short time. So he's delivered for New York. He's delivered for our country. I believe in his vision. I was with him literally the day after the debate debacle.
All right, he came to the city.
He was in the city. He was at the dedication of the Stonewall Monument Visitor Center. It was great. He was on the stage with Elton John, energetic, exciting. With some days later, for an hour-plus long meeting in the White House with other governors, he had asked us to come just less than a week after the debate. And he was pressure tested. What are you going to do differently? What's going to go on here? This can't happen again. And but what he said at the outset, I don't think has changed, which is, I'm the nominee. I was selected through the primary process. I've been president. I have a record to run on, and I'm in it to win it. And I looked him in the eyes, and I believed he was sincere. As long as Joe Biden's in it to win it, I'm there with him. But that is my view. And I don't find it, as helpful, because every day we're not talking about Donald Trump. We get one day close to the election. We're not doing our job as Democrats to point out the vast, vast differences in the vision that our parties hold for the future. So I'd like us to get back on track in terms of that. Obviously, if there's a change, there's a change. We're adaptable. We figure anything out. But Joe Biden is our nominee. He's our candidate, and I'm with him.
I want to ask you about congestion pricing. This was the #1 requested thing that I talked to you about, congestion pricing. You know, what I'm curious about, take me in the moment when you decided that you wanted to put it on an indefinite pause, because I assume it was during a meeting or maybe you were talking to somebody. When did that switch flip?
I also absorb a lot of information.
Yeah.
Many sources, whether I'm reading reports, statistics, what's behind a study, what's behind a decision. There's also the human side of intelligence gathering, which I'm very good at. And as it got closer, people started getting more anxious. The anxiety level was getting higher among those who would be the ones who had to pay the $15. And I do a lot of roundtable. I talk to people and just look at the environment. Inflation is up. Cost of living is up. Stress in families is up. Our desire to get people to come back from remote jobs or to come back to the city is intense. We have to do that as part of our recovery. Getting people back on the subway, and I can do all the press conferences I want or put out a press release that subways are safer than they've been since before the pandemic, when nobody talked about subway safety.
Yeah.
It's down 11% lower than it was in 2019, when this was not the headlines of the news. So all this is going on. People are still feeling anxious. Prices are going up. And all of a sudden, as it's getting closer, people's anxiety level starts getting higher. And I'm looking back and saying, at what point do we just say, let's not do this right now? Let's let people know we're listening to them. That we're not tone deaf to those who will be paying this price. The teachers who will be paying $3,800 more a year because they come in 5 days a week. They don't have an option. The hospital workers at NYU Langone, all of them would have to pay more. These nurses and aides have to pay more to go to their jobs. The hotel workers, I walked into a kitchen at the Sheraton when I was walking. I never get to walk in the entrances of buildings anymore. It's kind of, I hear they have beautiful lobbies, but I always come in through a back way.
This one's great.
It was a very nice lobby. But I walked into, after we made the decision, I walked into a room of people that were all dressed up, the hotel wait staff. They're going to go serve breakfast to 500 people. And I got a standing ovation, and I didn't understand why. And they said, thank you, because we would have had to pay this. We're coming in from Staten Island. We're coming in from here. So the voices that are the loudest don't support it. I understand that there's a lot of powerful voices who don't agree with my temporary pause. But I want them to know that this was not a wake up one day and just do something. But I could not wake up the day after and say I didn't try. I couldn't do that to the people of New York at this moment in time. So in the process, I'm spending an enormous amount of my time with my team, experts, talking about the objectives of congestion pricing. What were we striving for? 2 objectives. One is reduce congestion, but not just to have the streets more open and easier, more passable, but also the idea of reducing emissions in the process, right? I mean, that was the benefit. And we're continuing to forge ahead with our clean energy goals, and they're challenging. Again, the world has changed since 2019 when all these went into effect. And this is when the bail laws were done. This is when, the environmental laws were changed. This is when congestion. There's a pattern there that this is when the legislature shifted, and there were different priorities and adopted by my predecessor. It was a different time, but I can't be caught in the past of 2019 and make my decisions into 2024, 2025 based on that, because a lot has changed. So we're studying ways that we can be reducing, looking at traffic patterns now and parking and where are so many of the trucks, the business coming from?
Yeah.
Everybody should just ask themselves how many times you have deliveries to you personally in a week that you, in the old days before the pandemic, would have gone out and got yourself. You would have walked to the store. You would have maybe not ordered one item at a time. If you were delivering, you'd order everything at once. So all of us and those who used to walk to get dinner and get takeout, you look like you're guilty. You're smiling.
Yeah, because I get like 6 Amazon packages a week. Is the thing.
But did you always get 6? Did you get
No.
Okay, so that's 6 drives to your house there.
Exactly.
Okay, so we all have a role to play to examine our own behavior, but we want to reduce congestion. There are other ways in addition or as well. There are ways to deal with the environmental challenges. I mean, buildings are themselves are the greatest emitters of greenhouse gases.
Right.
And we know that, and we're doing a lot on that strategy. But also money for the MTA. And does anybody seriously think that as the architect of the bailout program 1 year ago, where we saved the MTA, and I remember people saying, does she even care about the MTA? She's from Buffalo. I was like, I'm so sick of that. I do care. I understand it's the lifeblood of this region. We don't function. We shut down. And I cannot have the economic powerhouse of the state of New York shut down. It must be invested in. Not just the maintenance, but also the signals. I have security cameras going on every single train, every single car. That'll be done by the end of the year because I said so. And this was supposed to be a many-year process. I said, no, it's going to be done sooner. And the infrastructure projects that I believe in, the Interborough Express, the logic of living in Queens and you want to go over to your job in Brooklyn now because both boroughs have changed so much, but you have to come into Manhattan first. Life has changed. The world has changed. So I want to get that connection done. I want to get the Second Avenue subway. A lot of conversations with my friends, Adriano Espaillat, who wants it to happen. We'll get it done.
Is that on a longer timeline, though, do you think?
We've been funding the MTA since 1910.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars. We somehow did it without a few months of congestion pricing. I don't know how. Miracle of miracles, but we have the ability to get it done, what we need to do. We just need a pause to assess the situation. Even you look at a place like London. Everyone, well, London did it. Well, London started at £5, not 15. So there's price factors. I'm not saying that's a path to go, but it may be. You don't know. I want to reserve all my options. And also, London carved out the theater district.
Oh, yeah.
Because they didn't want to hurt what would be their equivalent of Broadway. They had it stop during different hours so people didn't stop people from the suburbs from coming into dinner. So you have to look at the ripple effect of decisions that seem great when you get everybody all on the same page, except everybody's not on the same page.
Right.
Very influential people who thought about this a lot are on the same page, and they happen to have access to very large platforms. But majority of New Yorkers aren't there.
I want to ask you about the climate goals that you mentioned, because there was an audit from the State Controller's Office this week that, to paraphrase, said planning hasn't been great with the PSC and NYSERDA, so we're probably not going to meet those goals by the times that they prescribe. Do you think, first of all, do you agree with that? And second of all, can you get that back on track, or do we need to rethink that timeline of those goals?
Listen, there's no one who comes out of one of the most toxic parts of our state like I did. I used to watch the pollution being dumped into Lake Erie, one of the world's largest freshwater lakes, and it looked like molten lava dumping out of the steel plant where Dad and Grandpa worked, went into Lake Erie. And at night, even by late in the day, the sky was orange. As a child, I thought the sky was supposed to be orange because the emissions from the smokestacks were so prevalent. That was my childhood. And again, just a little bit down the road from Love Canal. So that's where I grew up. I'm a staunch environmentalist. Yeah. I come out of an area, I'm amazed I'm still alive when I think about what I used to swim in that lake.
Yeah, that's what I was just...
We watched it, we didn't know any better. No one knew any better. We were breathing the air, we were swimming in the lake, we're eating fish on Fridays out of that lake. It was like, what were people thinking? But I thought about it a lot, and I'm hardcore committed to protecting our environment. Now, what the controller was talking about, I need a little more time to analyze what he was talking about, but a lot of what he was talking about predates my time, because when they talk about the data that was being used back when the Democrats took the majority of both houses and they came up with this plan, and the goals were based on information from that time,
right.
Not information that we were involved with. But that being said, it was the law. We followed the law, but that was pre-pandemic. That was pre-supply chain disruptions that have hurt everything from offshore wind to building transmission lines. But that being said, I had been governor maybe a month, almost 3 years ago. It was Climate Week, late September, and I announced the largest clean energy projects in our state's history, with the Champlain-Hudson line coming down, hydroelectric power from Quebec coming down to power New York City, as well as wind and solar coming in from the Catskills. Both projects were out there. No one was quite sure which was going to happen. I said we need to be doing both at the same time. And our offshore wind initiative, Sunrise Wind, just opened up. We did our groundbreaking for that. We're continuing to power forward. But there's some things that are out of our control, like we're preparing for transition to electric vehicles. What we're finding is the public's not there yet.
We can't afford them.
That's an area where we can have tax rebates. We have tax rebates to make it a little bit better. But we're not at a place where we are counting on that as really driving our energy goals in a certain direction as well. And if the public isn't on board, it's hard.
Yeah.
Our job is to have as many, I'll say fuel stations, but they're not fuel stations, charging stations as possible. So we have to do that so people feel comfortable that they won't go a long way without being able to have a charge, except they do right now. We're not there yet. So those are just little snippets of the challenges we faced in meeting something that I would love to meet, but also the costs have gone so much. I now have to step back and say, what is the cost on the typical New York family? Just like I did with congestion pricing. What is the additional cost to live here? And if you're a family with 3 kids living in upstate New York and your source of energy is oil right now, even natural gas, what is the cost of that transition to you? What is the cost? And I can't do things without knowing the cost on consumers and either educating them that they believe that this is the way to go because it's good for the future, or making it just go a little bit slower in a path. So we're going to get to our goals, but if we miss it by a couple of years, which is probably what will happen, the goals are still worthy, but we have to think about the collateral damage of all of our major decisions, as I've done in both topics we're talking about. Yeah. You have to think about the collateral damage of these decisions, or the collateral impacts. You either mitigate them, or you have to rethink them.
Was that part of your thinking on the New York Heat Act at the end of session? Because I know that almost came to the floor. I know that it was close to passing, but there were some road bumps. Some Democrats in the legislature didn't want it. It was rumored that your office was against it. How do you balance that piece of legislation? Because that seems to have really upset people that it doesn't get to move. That bill in particular.
No, but I also think it's important to know why it doesn't move. I don't control movement on the floor.
Right.
I control whether I pick up my pen when it's passed by both houses and whether I sign it or not. That's where I have the decision-making power. I said I was open to considering that. Yeah. But there is also something called, amendments, right? So there can be a great idea, but sometimes we just have to scale it back or make it more reasonable or not hurt this group as much as you're. So there's a lot of, this is what I'm spending my summer doing, by the way. How does the governor spend her summer? 800 bills are passed, 500 in the final weeks of session in June. Yeah. So now my team dedicates themselves to now having to read every single word, analyze the cost, analyze the impact, make recommendations to me, and I have to read them all and make a decision. So that's why people, why do you wait till December? Well, because if you give me fewer bills, I'd be done in July. Last year, although I shouldn't complain, it's down from 1,007 last year.
Yeah. But I think you have 600-ish left.
Yeah, but usually the tougher ones. I mean, I can sign the ones naming a highway after a veteran any day of the week. Those are pretty easy. But the ones that really, they cause debate, and sometimes even if it's unanimous with the legislature, but I still have to look at it as my first question is, who's anybody being hurt by this? And I don't know if that always happened. What is the effect of this? Is it good?
Yeah. I want to end with you. We have a few minutes left. I want to end with you on housing, because I told my editor and his editor that I wanted to ask you a question about housing, because I've been looking for a house for 3 years in the Albany area. And the legislature passed the short-term rental bill to kind of limit Airbnbs. But there's this other problem too, especially upstate. I don't think it's a problem in New York City as well, but upstate, there's this problem where a house goes on the market and house flippers and corporations snatch it up within 24 hours. And it's created this vacuum where people like me can no longer afford the homes because they flip them, they make them too expensive. Is that on your radar? Because you negotiated this landmark housing package this year with the legislature, and there wasn't anything in there on that, but I don't know if that's as widespreadly known.
Mm-hmm. The answer is one word: supply. If there was enough supply, if people, communities, decision makers throughout the state would have opened up the door for more housing to be built, you would be able to have a house by now. And that's tragic to me, because you should be able to have a house. That's the American dream that we were raised with, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more of an upstate. Here it's like if you can get out of your parents' basement and get your own apartment, it's the dream because of the cost of everything is so much higher. But it's because communities are resistant, once people are in, to opening up the door to the others. And multifamily housing, which everybody has this image like, oh, that's the low-income housing. It's not.
I live in multifamily housing.
Yeah, multifamily means there's other people on the. I live in multifamily housing.
Yeah.
Here and in Buffalo. Okay, there's other neighbors. We're friends. We talk. Take the elevator together. But the cost of home ownership is so prohibitive for young people. It's heartbreaking. It really is. But I'm trying, and I was out in Long Island talking about this. Our pro-housing communities initiative, because I was told everybody wants carrots, not sticks. I gave them a lot of carrots, $650 million worth of carrots, to incentivize communities that here's a pot of money that I know you all want. This is for your downtown revitalization. This is Restore New York. These are all the kinds of, it's the Long Island initiative, the Mid-Hudson initiative. All this money I put over here, only eligible to communities that have committed to building more housing with growth targets. At first, there were only 20 communities. And when I let word out to say, well, those 20 communities are going to do really well with $600 million between them, now we have over 100 have applied. We're certifying more and more all the time. So I'm working on that strategy, trying to incentivize the reluctant communities, but also even in the city. This is not your question because you're asking about housing upstate, but why are there so many barriers? Why was there even restriction on converting abandoned office space to housing? Wouldn't that make sense to have Midtown? I mean, we kind of know now what's going to be filled up and what's not going to be. A couple of years after the pandemic, still not sure. But now we have office buildings that are not fully occupied. I get that. Why aren't we allowing that to be converted to housing? Now, here's the issue. It's a lot more expensive to convert that, especially those with large floor plans. So you give an incentive, right? You make it worthwhile for a developer to do that. But for some, in Albany, that is so taboo. What do you mean we're going to incentivize something like that to happen for rich people? No. so that's the challenge I have. I could have done even more. I was dedicated to doing more, but I have to work in the confines of compromise. So what we came away with, as you said, a landmark, it is extraordinary that we got as much as we did to incentivize developers for housing, but also break down the barriers, even the floor to ceiling ratios. I mean, there are restrictions there. I think there should be more transit-oriented development. If there is a train station in your community, why not take that parking lot that people leave their vehicle in all day and put up maybe a 4-story building, 5-story building? People can live there, nice restaurant on the roof or a swimming pool, retail on the first floor, and wedge in a few floors of parking. So you actually can double or triple the ability to park more vehicles. So I think about housing all the time, and I want to get to a point where someone like you has a choice that you can go around like I did when I was younger. Even though interest rates were 13% on my first house. So I get a little house. But that should not be a barrier to you achieving your dreams. That pains me here in the state of New York. We're still working on it.
Do you think, and this is the last question because you got to go.
Said the last one was?
That $650 million in the pro-housing community initiative, do you think you'll do that year after year, or does that pay out over a number of years? I'm not.
There's still money in it. Yeah, I mean, I'll do that annually. All right. Let me check myself. Blake, my budget director, can I do that annually? Okay, all right.
As long as Blake says yes.
That's good to know. No, because I want to see if it works. I mean, everything takes time. I mean, I didn't get housing done my first go at it last year. And people didn't take note that I was the first governor since Rockefeller who took on housing, because it is a lightning rod in many areas. So I didn't get it done. I was declared a failure. She doesn't know what she's doing, can't handle the legislature, write her off. But you got to be in this for the long game. We started people talking about it. All of a sudden, it's a topic of conversation, not just in Albany, but all over. And then you start going out into communities and start building support in Long Island, Westchester, upstate, and in the city in particular. Then you have to get the elected officials on board, and then you start moving people, and then you write some op-eds, and you get people. You just have to know how to work the system. And a year later, we have something that you've called a landmark piece of legislation. That's how you get things done. I don't have to create enemies in the process. I don't have to disparage people in the news. I've changed the culture of Albany in ways where I'm more respectful than they've ever seen to other electeds, particularly those who are in leadership positions.
Yeah, I don't think people are used to that yet.
No, and even getting along with the mayor of New York, like, oh my God. Yeah. 2 years later, they're still talking, they're not fighting. What's wrong with them? But guess what? We're just getting done. And to be able to give money to the city of New York to help with subway safety, no one would ever do that before, because like, well, that's your problem. You failed at that. Think of the past way it was done. It doesn't inspire confidence in people. People want to know that when we elect you, your job is to get along with everybody else we elect. That's what I believe. And that's what I'm doing. We're changing the culture of government here in the state of New York.
Well, Governor Kathy Hochul, thank you so much for being here, and a big thank you to Hearst for hosting us.
Thank you. All right.
Again, that's an excerpt from Thursday's exclusive Times Union interview with New York Governor Kathy Hochul. You can read more State House news at timesunion.com/state. But did you know that you can also get exclusive insights into state government and politics from Dan Clark and the Capitol Bureau sent directly to your inbox every day? Go sign up for the Capitol Confidential newsletter at capitolconfidential.com. You'll also get access to future events like this one. That's it for this week. We are going to take another little hiatus from the Eagle for the next 2 weeks to prepare for the launch of our brand new limited series podcast called Catastrophic Failure, the story of the Schoharie limo crash. Here's the trailer.
At approximately 1:55 p.m., Schoharie County Sheriff's Office and New York State Police Patrols responded to a motor vehicle crash at the intersection of State Route 30 and State Route 30A in the town of Schoharie.
The limo crash that killed 20 people in upstate New York on October 6, 2018 is one of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in U.S. history.
The thing should have never been on the road to begin with.
People looked at me and said, "How did they all die? Are you kidding me? Did you see that limo?"
How the hell did this happen?
I'm Jessica Marshall. In this podcast from the Times Union, reporter Larry Rulison and I were going to attempt to unravel a very complicated story that goes far beyond the small upstate New York community where it happened.
The owner of the limousine company was a former FBI informant.
Well, this was certainly one of the most egregious cases of intentional disregard for human life.
It's a story of tragedy and loss, of negligence and consequence. But more than anything else, it's a story of catastrophic failure.
We just want the truth to come out.
Coming soon to timesunion.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Catastrophic Failure is premiering July 30th. You can find it on timesunion.com or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It is one of the most important stories that we've ever told. You won't want to miss it. The Eagle is a production of the Times Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from the Times Union digital team and the newsroom. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Support for this podcast comes from CDTA, The Eagle, a Times Union podcast driven by CDTA.